They raised you on bedtime stories, not of dragons but of fairness. That good people win. That hard work pays off. That if you just do what you're told, things will turn out fine. But the deeper truth? Those stories weren't designed to prepare you. They were designed to pacify you. From your first school bell to your last office shift, you were taught to obey, not to question. To perform, not to think. To compete for gold stars while someone else printed the rulebook. You wake up early, stay late, say yes when others say no. You sacrifice time, health, sanity, all for a promise that someday, someone will notice. And then you see it. Someone with less discipline, less skill, less heart, winning. They play the game better, not because they deserve it, but because they understand what you don't. It's not about work. It's about leverage. This isn't a glitch in the system. This is the system. Because the system was never meant to reward effort. It was built to extract it from you. You were trained to be loyal, to suffer with pride, to see morality not as strength, but as duty. But what if that was the point? What if your morality isn't rewarded because it was never meant to be? And that's the lie most people never question because it feels good. It feels holy. But comfort is not clarity. And if you keep mistaking obedience for virtue, you'll spend your life being applauded for staying in your cage. The world you live in doesn't run on effort. It runs on control. Not control you have, but control over you. Look around. Not at the headlines but at the patterns. The nurse saving lives makes less than a 19-year-old flashing rented Lamborghinis. The teacher who shaped futures retires broke. The janitor keeping the hospital clean can't afford to get sick. And yet the system praises them. Heroes, they're called, applauded, celebrated, but never paid. Why? Because praise is the cheapest currency of control. You see, the system doesn't need to beat you down. It just needs you to feel seen, just enough to stay loyal. Just enough to silence the question. Why does sacrifice never equal power? Because the machine isn't broken. It's fed. Fed by your energy, your belief, your exhaustion. And every day you show up hoping for recognition, the machine smiles. Because you're doing exactly what it needs. Working without questioning. Obeying without leverage. This isn't about justice. This is about structure. You're not being underpaid because you're unworthy. You're underpaid because the system profits when you don't know your worth. The harsh truth? Your loyalty is a product. Your time is harvested. Your hope is weaponized. Every time you whisper, someday it'll pay off. You are fueling a system that survives on someday never arriving. And yet, you keep going. Not because you're weak, but because you were trained to endure. Trained to believe that if you just suffer long enough, the gates will open. But the gates were never locked. They were guarded by stories. The story that virtue always wins. That submission is noble. That suffering without rebellion makes you good. But good to whom? You weren't raised to be powerful. You were raised to be dependable. And that's not morality. That's manufacturing. So the question becomes, are you still living for the lie? Or ready to confront the system that sold it to you? You weren't born obedient. As a child you questioned everything. Why this? Why that? Why now? But somewhere along the line, you stopped asking. Not because you understood the answers, but because you were taught not to. Taught that good boys and girls don't question. Taught that authority means truth. That loudness means rebellion. That discomfort means you're wrong. You were domesticated, not for your safety, but for their convenience. And the ones who built that cage? They didn't look like villains. They looked like teachers, bosses, parents, preachers. Smiling faces telling you, work hard, be humble, stay in line, and the world will reward you. But here's the twist. They weren't lying maliciously. They were repeating what they were told. Generations raised not to rebel, but to recycle. To hand down the same myth. Suffering is sacred. Silence is strength. Obedience is virtue. And in doing so, they unknowingly became guardians of the very system that uses them. Because that's how control works best. Not through force, but through faith. A worker who believes in the system is more useful than one who fears it. The illusion of fairness is more powerful than 1,000 rules. You weren't trained to own power. You were trained to wait for permission, to raise your hand, to ask for time off, to hope for approval. But power doesn't wait. It moves. It takes. It rewrites. You were never meant to be the author of your life. Just a loyal character in someone else's story. And yet you thank them. You thank them for the cage. Because it was warm, familiar, decorated with compliments like hardworking, reliable, nice. But none of those words build freedom. And now you feel it. The friction. The unease. The moment when the story no longer fits. That's not failure. That's awakening. The beginning of the real question. If the cage was built to feel like home, what does freedom actually look like? You've been told your whole life. Create value, and you'll be rewarded. So you put in the work. You meet the deadlines. You carry the team. You fix the messes someone else made. And when the credit is handed out, you're left clapping while someone else steps on stage. But that's not an accident. It's not even personal. It's structural. See, you were trained to create value, but never trained to control it. And in this world, value without control is just fuel. Fuel for someone else's machine. Ask yourself, why does the engineer building the infrastructure get a pink slip, while the executive who doesn't understand the product gets a bonus? Why does the teacher shaping young minds struggle to pay rent, while an influencer gets rich selling dropshipping dreams from a Bali resort? Because effort doesn't rule this world. Leverage does. The system was never built to reward those who produce. It was built to reward those who position. Those who own, not just do. Those who influence, not just serve. Think of it like this. The builder lifts the bricks. The architect sells the design. But the developer owns the land. And who gets rich? Exactly. You weren't taught to think like a developer. You were taught to clock in. To see your value in hours, not impact. In titles, not autonomy. So when you work harder, but don't rise, you blame yourself. Maybe you didn't hustle enough. Maybe you weren't loud enough. Maybe you're just unlucky. But none of that is true. You're not underachieving. You're being extracted. Your labor is profitable. Just not for you. Because while you're producing value, someone else is capturing it. They built the game. You're playing it. And every time you do the right thing hoping to get ahead, you prove the system still works. Not for justice, but for power. And until you shift from asking, how do I work better? To, how do I gain leverage? You will keep climbing a ladder that someone else keeps moving. You call it work ethic. You call it integrity. You say, I don't want to play dirty. I just want to earn it the right way. But if you scratch beneath the surface, is it really principle? Or is it fear wearing a costume? Fear of being judged. Fear of standing alone. Fear of breaking rules you never agreed to, but follow anyway. The system doesn't just own your hours. It owns your moral language. It taught you that saying yes is good. That being agreeable is noble. That questioning the order makes you difficult. That walking away makes you ungrateful. It turned your instinct for survival into a badge of virtue. And you believed it, because everyone else did too. You believed that silence was strength. That endurance was maturity. That staying small was humble. But real humility isn't shrinking. It's knowing your worth without needing applause. You were conditioned to believe that obedience is respect. But there is nothing respectful about self-erasure. There is nothing admirable about martyrdom when no one asked you to die. And yet you keep showing up, hoping that if you just keep being good, someday they'll see it. Someday you'll be chosen, promoted, finally recognized. But deep down, you know, that day isn't coming. Because the system doesn't reward quiet strength. It exploits it. It doesn't see your loyalty as noble. It sees it as predictable. And predictability doesn't earn power, it invites control. Here's the hardest part to admit. You're not just trapped by the system. You're trapped by the version of yourself who thinks staying trapped makes you righteous. But being miserable quietly isn't moral. It's just quiet. And that silence serves someone, but it's not you. So ask yourself honestly, are you clinging to your beliefs because they're true? Or because they're safe? Because until you face that, you'll keep polishing your shackles and calling it character. From the moment you could walk, the world sang you a lullaby. If you do good, good will come to you. And you believed it. You believed it when you lined up quietly in school. When you raised your hand. When you played fair while others cheated. You believed it every time they said, good things happen to good people. But here's the truth no one warned you about. That belief is a trap. Psychologists call it the just world fallacy. The idea that the universe keeps score, and that effort equals reward. That fairness isn't just a dream but a law. But it's not. Because in the real world, good people lose. Honest people get stepped on. And the ones who climb fastest? They often know the game is rigged, and play anyway. So why do so many still cling to the lie? Because it's comforting. Because it makes your suffering make sense. Because if the world is fair, then all you have to do is keep grinding. It gives your exhaustion meaning. It gives your pain a purpose. It gives your silence a halo. But that halo is just a leash. Because as long as you believe the system will eventually notice you, you'll never rebel against it. You won't ask for more. You won't negotiate. You won't walk away. You'll just keep hoping. And hope, when it's disconnected from power, becomes obedience. And the system knows that. That's why the myth is everywhere. In children's books, in school mottos, in corporate slogans, work hard, dream big. But no one tells you that dreaming big means nothing if someone else owns the ladder. You see it, you feel it, you live it. The underpaid nurse, the exhausted factory worker, the overqualified intern, all of them clinging to a promise that was never written for them, just sold to them. And yet they keep waiting. Not because they're foolish, but because they're moral. And morality, when weaponized, becomes a prison no one wants to escape, because they still believe the warden is on their side. You were taught to win by working hard, by showing up early, staying late, following the rules. But the people who actually win, they don't play the game you were taught. They own it. They don't clock in. They don't wait for approval. They don't chase validation. They write the script while you memorize your lines. Because here's the truth most people never see. The system doesn't reward the best worker. It rewards the best strategist. The top performers aren't always the smartest. They're often the most positioned, the most connected, the most aware of how power actually flows. They understand something you were never taught. That perception is leverage. That relationships are capital. That silence can be currency, and that morality, when visible, is often a performance. You see them. Effortless. Confident. Untouchable. Not because they're better, but because they learned early what you were never told. The ladder is fake. It was never meant to be climbed, only believed in. While you were perfecting your craft, they were learning people. While you were saying yes to prove yourself, they were learning when to say no to preserve leverage. While you were grinding, they were navigating. You might call them manipulative, selfish, unfair, but they call it survival. And in a world built on power, those who understand it, rule. Those who ignore it, serve. This doesn't mean ethics are irrelevant. It means ethics without awareness are useless. Because kindness without boundaries becomes exploitation. And hard work without ownership becomes servitude. That's why you see executives who contribute little, but take everything. Why the real decisions are made in closed rooms, not performance reviews. Why networking events build more careers than resumes do. It's not about your effort. It's about your edge. And the sooner you stop pretending the system is neutral, the sooner you can stop begging for crumbs and start building leverage. Because the real game is invisible. And those who win learn how to see what others deny. They told you strength was sacrifice. That goodness meant obedience. That virtue meant following the script, even when it cost you your fire. And so you complied. You turned down your voice. You bowed to rules. You made yourself small, all to be seen as a good person. But let's ask the forbidden question. Good for who? Who benefits from your silence? From your humility? From your willingness to burn out quietly while they light cigars with your ambition? They never wanted you dangerous. They wanted you dependable. You were taught to wait your turn, but the turn never comes. Because while you wait, someone else writes. They write the story. They write the policy. They write the culture, and they never wrote you in as the hero. And still, you keep trying to earn your way into a script designed to make you a background character. Here's the shift Nietzsche warned us about. That morality without authorship becomes enslavement. A beautiful cage built from self-denial. But there is another kind of morality. Not one of blind service, but of conscious power. A morality rooted not in obedience, but in authorship. See, true strength is not how quietly you suffer. It's how deliberately you create. To live on your own terms. To write new rules. To lead with principle, not perform it. You can be kind and powerful. You can be generous and strategic. You can be moral without being meek. Because goodness without direction becomes manipulation. And humility without sovereignty becomes control. That's why the system praises your loyalty, but never gives you leadership. Because it fears what happens when the quiet ones realize. They were never weak, just misled. So stop asking for a seat. Build your own table. Write your own page. Create your own code. And remember, the goal is not to become ruthless. The goal is to become sovereign. Because when you shift from servant to author, you stop surviving in someone else's story and start shaping a world that reflects your values, not their agenda. You've woken up. You see the lie now. You know that waiting to be rewarded is a dead end, and obedience without leverage is a slow death. But here's where most people go wrong. They swing to the other extreme. They confuse awakening with apathy. They trade submission for cynicism. And they end up hollow, ruthless, but lost. But that's not power. That's trauma in armor. Real power doesn't abandon morals. It refines them. It takes your values and builds a fortress around them. Not to hide, but to protect. Not to submit, but to direct. So how do you move forward? You start by rejecting the idea that morality means powerlessness. That being a good person means being a silent one. You don't have to scream. You don't have to exploit. But you do have to become strategic. Start here. Stop saying yes to be liked. Say yes when it aligns with your mission. Don't confuse praise with progress. Your value isn't measured by applause. Study leverage. Who controls what you're building? Who profits? Who decides? Build things you own. Side projects. Networks. Skills that compound. And negotiate with clarity. Know your worth and say it out loud. Walk away when respect is gone. Not as revenge, as reclamation. And most of all, stop treating loyalty like a personality trait. Loyalty is earned, not owed. This doesn't make you selfish. It makes you sovereign. And sovereignty doesn't mean stepping on others. It means refusing to be stepped on. It's choosing your battles. Reading the room. Knowing when to speak and when to build in silence. You don't need to become loud to be powerful. You need to become clear. Because once you know what you stand for, you stop falling for every game dressed in praise. Power is not domination. It's direction. And when you reclaim your direction, you become untouchable. Not because you have no enemies, but because you no longer need their approval to move. You were raised to wait for approval, to wait for opportunity, to wait for fairness. But now, waiting is the first form of surrender. You've spent years in systems that praised your work but ignored your worth. That clapped for your sacrifice but never handed you the pen. And somewhere inside you knew. The applause wasn't freedom. It was anesthesia. They numbed you with compliments. They told you were valuable, as long as you stayed quiet. As long as you followed rules written before you were born, by people you'll never meet, for a world that no longer exists. But now you see the code. You see that morality without power is manipulation. That obedience dressed as virtue is just soft control. That hard work without ownership is a leash wrapped in gold. So what do you do with this truth? You become dangerous. Not violent. Not cruel. But dangerous in the way every free thinker is dangerous. To systems that depend on you staying asleep. You don't throw away your morals. You sharpen them. You build a new life. Not with rage, but with clarity. Not with bitterness, but with blueprint. You become the person the system never trained you to be. The author. The strategist. The sovereign. And yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, it means shedding old skins. Disappointing people who only loved the version of you that served them. Stepping into rooms where you're no longer the most agreeable person. But finally, the most honest. But that's the price of power. Not power over others. Power over yourself. Your time. Your values. Your direction. Because once you stop waiting to be chosen, you start building a life that doesn't require permission. You stop being the tool. And start being the architect. This is not a rejection of morality. It's a resurrection. You still care. You still give. But now, you choose when, how, and to whom. Not because you're cold, but because you're awake. And once you wake up, there is no going back. Not to the cage. Not to the myth. Not to the version of you that waited for fairness. Because now, you don't just live. You lead.